Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories. I had been working as a private investigator running my own agency for the last 12 years. I started my career as a police officer, learned the ins and outs, and eventually decided to be my own boss. Typically, I handled 1 or 2 cases at a time, depending on my workload. I made a decent living and enjoyed the freedom of setting my own hours. At 37, I had been divorced for about 10 months, with my marriage lasting less than that. Dating was never an issue for me. I'm a reasonably attractive guy, financially stable, with a promising future, which is what many women look for. My ex-wife, Sophia, was about my age, an attractive woman and good in bed. We had been dating on and off for around 10 months before she convinced me to take her to New Haven, where we tied the knot. I'm still not entirely sure why I went through with it. I liked Sophia enough, but I can't say I was ever in love with her. I suppose I thought it was time to settle down. We moved into my condo, which had all the amenities: a pool, sauna, hot tub and fireplace. It was a great place. Sophia, on the other hand, had been living in an apartment and worked as a beautician in a small shop. I knew she wanted her own salon, and I figured that's probably why she pushed for marriage, to have me buy it for her. After about a month, I got her that salon. It was a nice 4-chair setup, and she hired 2 of her friends. Naturally, she was the owner. I didn't pay much attention to her business, but I gathered she was doing well enough. One Saturday, she told me she had a couple of appointments and would be home later. I said that was fine, as I had a case to work on and would be out most of the day. As I was a few blocks from her salon, I needed to use the restroom, so I decided to stop by. When I got there, the sign in the window said closed. I assumed she had finished early and gone home, which was no big deal since I had my own key. I unlocked the door and made my way to the restroom, but then I heard sounds coming from her office. As a private investigator, I knew exactly what those sounds were. What I didn't know was who was inside. Quietly, I approached the door, which I could tell wasn't locked. I drew my gun, which I always kept tucked behind my back, and quickly opened the door. There on the couch was my wife of only a few months, her skirt pulled up to her waist, sitting on another man's lap. I startled them both. Sophia screamed, "Jack." My name. That's all she could say before her lover pushed her off. As he tried to get up, I pistol whipped him, leaving a bruise and a cut on his cheek. "Get up and get the hell out," I growled. "The next time I see you, you're a dead man." He scrambled to pull up his pants and darted out the door as fast as he could. Sophia was crying, insisting it wasn't what it looked like. I told her to shut up. "You're supposed to be my wife and you were screwing another guy. It's exactly what it looked like. This marriage is over." I gave her 1 hour to go to the condo, collect her things, and leave her key on the kitchen table. "If your stuff's still there when I get home, it's going out on the street," I said before turning and walking out. I went to my buddy's house. He's a lawyer, and I knew he didn't work on Saturdays. When he answered the door, he invited me in. I told him I wanted a divorce as soon as possible because I'd just caught Sophia with another man at her salon. I also said she could keep the salon, which was probably why she married me in the first place, but that was all she was getting. If she wanted to fight it, she'd lose the salon, thanks to the prenuptial agreement. Luke, my lawyer, called my house while Sophia was packing her things. She was crying, saying she didn't know where she'd live, but agreed to the terms. Any communication could be sent to the salon. The divorce went through quickly, just as I expected. Luke later found out that the guy Sophia was with was her old boyfriend from before we got together. They resumed their relationship after the divorce, and that was the last I saw of either of them. I was single again, which suited me just fine. I was working on another case involving a cheating wife, so I was staying at the Greenbrier Inn, keeping an eye on my client's wife. It was a standard job. She had told her husband she was going on a work trip with her boss, but of course they shared a room at the motel. I found out which room they were in and set up 2 surveillance cameras. I had good connections with places like the motel, and I paid them well for their cooperation. All I had to do was wait until the next morning to collect my tapes. While I was sitting at a booth in the lounge, having a drink, a young woman dressed like a hooker came up and asked if I wanted some company. I couldn't believe someone so attractive had to hustle. Just as I was about to turn her down, the manager approached her, saying there was no solicitation allowed in the establishment. I quickly stood up and said, "Where have you been?" "You're half an hour late." The manager immediately apologized and walked away. He probably didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I asked the young woman to sit down, and I could tell she was nervous. She thanked me for protecting her from getting thrown out. She was new to this and unsure of what to do. I leaned back and asked her name. She said, "Ava Clark." I responded, "Now tell me your real name." She hesitated before raising her head and replying, "Grace Evans." Then she asked if I wanted her services, and if not, she'd have to leave. She needed to make some money. I asked if she had a pimp or was using drugs, telling her she didn't need to be selling herself. Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't have a pimp, and I've never done drugs. I need money for my daughter, so please, if you don't want anything, let me go so I can make some money. I was intrigued by this girl. She seemed too timid to be selling herself. She would either end up controlled by a pimp or worse, dead. Okay, Sarah. How much for the whole night? She looked startled, unsure of what to charge. Would you come to my room for the night for $250, I asked. Sarah hesitated. I guess so, she replied, but what do I have to do for $250? I told her, talk to me. That's all. Just talk. I pulled out $200 bills and a 20, set them on the table, and stood up. Sarah picked up the money and followed me to the elevator. We didn't speak until we reached my room. I unlocked the door and held it open for her. She hesitated but stepped inside. Once inside, she began to undo the top buttons of her blouse. I stopped her. That's not necessary, I said. Please, just sit down either on the bed or the couch. She chose the couch, and I pulled a chair over to sit next to her. She looked at me, confused. I don't understand, she said. You paid me $250 to come up here. What is it you want from me? Are you a cop? I'm a private investigator. Sarah, her eyes widened in fear. Oh my God, are you going to arrest me? No, Sarah, I'm a private investigator, not a cop or detective. I want to help you if you'll let me. I used to be a cop, and if I still were, I would have had to arrest you tonight. I don't understand. Who are you, and why do you want to help me? Listen, Sarah, my name is Sam Mitchell. You can call me Ben or BC. It seems like you're going through something, and for some reason I'm worried about you. If you'll talk to me, maybe I can find a way to help. I don't think you really want to be a prostitute. And I don't believe this is who you are. You need to trust me and open up. Can you do that? I don't know why you want to help me. No one has ever helped me without wanting something in return. I just need money for my daughter. We lost our insurance, and she needs medical attention. Hold on, Sarah. Let's start with this. How long have you been doing this? My guess is it hasn't been very long. Sarah broke down in tears. This is my first night. You're my second client. I need the money for my daughter's medical bills. I understand you need money for your daughter, and I get that, but I want to know about your first client and why you approached me tonight. Well, I was standing on the corner, like you see in the movies, and a guy asked if I'd give him a hand job for $25. I said yes, and he drove around the corner. I did what he asked. He told me I looked more like one of the girls you find in hotels, not someone working the streets. So I decided to come inside the motel and look around. I saw you sitting alone and approached you. That's it. Damn, Sarah, you could have been arrested, beaten, or even killed. What were you thinking? Where would your daughter be then? She started crying again, and I felt sorry for her, but simply giving her money wasn't going to fix her problems. So, Sarah, you're saying this was your first and only time prostituting yourself? You need to tell me the truth if I'm going to help you. Tell me about yourself. I won't judge you. I genuinely want to help. Start from the beginning and tell me about your life. Sarah nodded, wiping her tears, and began to talk. This really was my first time trying to sell myself. I don't know what else to do. When I was about 8 years old, I became a ward of the state. The police took both of my parents away. My caseworker told me they were dealing cocaine. I didn't even know what that was. I was just a kid. As I got older, foster parents tried to explain it to me. I think my parents went to prison. But I never heard from them again. One foster parent said my dad was killed in prison, but I don't know if it's true. I bounced from one foster home to another. Some families were nice. Others treated me like I was some kind of criminal. I think they assumed I would end up like my parents. I did okay in school, considering I was always moving around, but I never had many friends. Once other kids' parents found out about my family, they wouldn't let their kids hang out with me. It wasn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong, but I guess I was paying for my parents' mistakes. As I got older, I learned to adjust to each new family. I never got too close to anyone, because I knew I'd be moved soon. I didn't like the last family I stayed with, but when I turned 18, I stuck it out until I graduated. That's when I met a boy named Adam Foster. You could say he was my first real boyfriend. After graduation, I turned 19 and ran away with him. We rented a trailer. I started community college and worked at a store, while Adam got a job at a factory. Then I found out I was pregnant. Adam said he wasn't ready to be a dad and told me to get an abortion, or he'd leave. I had never had anyone before, and I wasn't about to give up my baby. So Adam left us. I kept working until I was too far along in my pregnancy to continue, and then a friend I met at the store moved in to help pay the rent and buy groceries. After my daughter Ella was born, I was lucky enough to get a job at a local bank doing bookkeeping. It was a good job and it gave us both health insurance. I still had some medical bills from the pregnancy. But the hospital let me make monthly payments. That's how it's been for the last 5 years. My roommate, Olivia, and I share taking care of Ella. I work during the day while Olivia watches her, and I take over in the evenings. About 4 months ago, I found out Ella might have asthma. The doctors prescribed her medication, but then the bank announced layoffs and I was on the list. I started getting unemployment. But my health insurance was cut off. I couldn't find another job like the one I had at the bank because I never finished college. I became desperate. Ella's condition was getting worse, and I had no way to pay for her treatment. I didn't go to children's services because I remembered my own experience, and I was terrified they might take Ella from me. She's all I have. With medical bills piling up and no options, I got desperate. I looked in the mirror one day and told myself, "You're still attractive. Maybe someone will pay to sleep with you." I was scared, but I didn't know what else to do. I got dressed, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. And here I am, she broke down crying again. "Don't cry, Sarah. Things are going to get better." "Have you eaten lately?" She shook her head, so I picked up the phone and ordered room service some sandwiches and salads. I asked if she wanted something to drink and she said a soda would be fine. I ordered a couple of beers for myself. While we waited for the food, I turned on the TV to catch some news and kept talking to Sarah. She mentioned that she was 26 and her daughter Ella was 5. As we watched the news, a segment came on about a local businessman, Matthew Harris, receiving an award for his charitable work. I noticed Sarah grimace at the mention of his name, though she didn't say anything. Just then there was a knock on the door. It was Ethan, a hotel employee and a friend, bringing up our food. I asked him how things were going in the next room, and he laughed, saying he had heard plenty of moaning and groaning. I reminded him to call me in the morning before cleaning the room, and he assured me he would. I gave him a big tip for delivering our meal. Sarah asked what that was about, so I told her the truth, that I was doing surveillance for a client and needed to finish my work in the morning. It was getting late, so I offered Sarah to spend the night. I didn't feel right sending her back out so late. I told her she could have the bed, and I'd take the couch, which pulled out into a bed. She asked if she could call Olivia to check on Ella, and I overheard their conversation. Olivia asked, "You did it, didn't you?" Sarah replied weakly. "I'll tell you about it in the morning." "Is Ella okay?" Olivia reassured her that Ella was fine and had gone right to sleep after taking her medication. "Are you going to sleep with the guy?" Olivia asked. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," Sarah responded. After we finished eating, Sarah went to clean up. While she was in the bathroom, I jotted down a few notes and names I needed to check whether Sarah had been honest with me if I was going to help her. When she came out, she was wearing one of my oversized t-shirts and asked if it was okay for her to wear it. I smiled and said, "That t-shirt has never looked better," and to be honest, it was true. Afterward, I went to the bathroom to take a shower. When I came out, Sarah was fast asleep, looking peaceful, almost angelic. I sincerely hoped she had been honest with me because I genuinely wanted to help her. The next morning, I woke up early and she was still sound asleep. I left her a note, making it clear she better be there when I returned. Then, I headed to a nearby 24-hour Target. I went to the women's section and picked out a blouse, a pair of jeans, a pack of bikini underwear, and a pair of sneakers. Afterward, I stopped by the cosmetics counter and grabbed some White Diamonds perfume and a tube of lipstick that I thought would suit her. I also realized I forgot to grab a bra, so I went back to get that as well. I packed everything into an overnight bag and headed back to the motel. As I opened the door, I heard her in the shower, and surprisingly, she was singing. She had a lovely voice, and I could easily imagine her singing to her daughter. A few moments later, the shower stopped, and the bathroom door opened. I must have startled her because she let out a small scream. She was standing there with just a bath towel wrapped around her. Damn, she looked stunning. I handed her the overnight bag and she asked what it was. I explained that it was clothes because I wasn't about to take her out to breakfast dressed like a hooker. She took the bag and went back into the bathroom. When she came out a few minutes later, she was smiling and asked how I knew her sizes. I told her that when I used the bathroom the night before, her clothes had been all over the place, and her bra, panties, and blouse all had size tags on them. I guessed the jeans size based on her skirt. I chose the cologne and lipstick because I liked them. She thanked me, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and then asked what happens now. I told her we'd go get breakfast, and after I finished my business, I'd make sure she got home. After we returned from breakfast, I had to admit I thoroughly enjoyed her company. In jeans, she could have easily passed for my daughter. She was a beautiful girl, and she smelled amazing. She smiled at me throughout breakfast. I went next door to retrieve my tapes, and based on the state of the room, it was clear my client's wife and her boss had pulled an all-nighter. I planned to take the tapes to my client later. I asked Sarah if she had driven to the motel the night before. She laughed and said her car was so old it could be a classic if it looked better and ran properly. It was just a rust bucket that got her from place to place. As we were getting ready to leave the room, she tried to give me back the $250, saying she hadn't earned it. I told her she had. I'd offered her $250 to spend the night with me, and all she had to do was talk. She had certainly done that. Once again, tears welled up in her eyes. She was like a tear-making machine. We got into my Chevy, and I drove her home, which was in a trailer park not far from the town center. On the way, I made her promise never to try being a hooker again. I gave her my card and told her to call me if she needed anything, and that I would check in with her in a couple of days. Everything would be fine. When we arrived, she gave me a big hug and this time kissed me on the lips, thanking me repeatedly for helping her. Of course, more tears followed as she grabbed her overnight bag and walked into her house. I headed to my office to make a few calls. I reached out to one of my contacts and asked her to dig up any information she could on a few people: Grace Evans, Adam Foster, and Matthew Harris. I told her to keep things quiet and get back to me as soon as possible. Then I called my client and told him I had some tapes proving his wife was cheating on him and that they should provide all the evidence he needed. We scheduled a meeting for later in the day. I reviewed the tapes, and his wife was quite the sight. She acted like a sex addict, the way she went at it with her boss. After they were done, she let another woman into the room. They had 2 double beds, and while the boss lay on one, the 2 women had some fun on the other. It was quite something to watch. When a woman is with another woman, it looks different. They know exactly where to aim for. I ran the other woman's picture through a database, just in case my client wanted her name. That's why I charge the big bucks. I give clients everything they need. I met with my client and advised him to watch the tapes alone. I reminded him they were taken without the knowledge of the participants, so they couldn't be used in court, but they'd make great leverage. I also gave him a copy of the hallway surveillance showing who went in and out of the room and when. That tape could be used in court. He paid me and I left. Unfortunately, I likely triggered another divorce, but that's what I do. When you play, you pay. That's my motto. When I returned to my office, there was a message from my contact asking me to call back. She had found information on all 3 people. First, Adam Foster worked at a local factory. The only reason he was in the system was due to a traffic stop about a year ago where they found a small amount of weed. He paid a fine and did a few days of community service, no big deal. Now, Grace Evans was a different story. She'd been a ward of the court since she was 8. Her parents had been imprisoned for cocaine dealing. Her father was killed in a prison riot about 9 years ago, and her mother was released and moved out west. My contact didn't dig further because the mother wasn't on the radar. Then she dropped the big news: Matthew Harris was the man accused of assaulting Grace. He was also the one receiving the Outstanding Citizen Award in the coming weeks. There wasn't much more on Sarah except that she'd received a ticket for an unsafe vehicle about a month ago. I thanked my contact and hung up. Everything Sarah had told me was true, except for the details about the assault. But remembering the grimace on her face, I knew she wasn't lying about that. After a long, busy day, I headed home, thinking about Sarah and how I could help her. She seemed so kind, and I felt something for her. Maybe it was knowing the struggles she had endured in her short life, or the fact that she had a sick child who clearly meant the world to her. Perhaps I genuinely cared for her. I decided to turn in early, as my back ached from sleeping on that uncomfortable hideaway bed. Knowing that a beautiful woman was just a few feet away, and I was playing the knight in shining armor, made it a strange night. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was 4:30 in the morning. I jumped out of bed and answered. It was Sarah, and she sounded nervous or scared. "Ben, is that you?" "Sarah, calm down. I recognize your voice. What's going on?" "It's Ella. She's having trouble breathing, so I rushed her to the hospital. The doctor wants to admit her, but I need to borrow some money for the admission. Can you help me with part of the medical bill?" I'll be there in 15 minutes. Tell that doctor to admit her immediately. I hung up, quickly dressed and raced to the hospital. I knew they were required to admit children without question, so someone was likely giving Sarah a hard time, probably because of her unpaid bills. It made me angry. Why do people always seem to hassle single mothers? When I arrived, Sarah ran up to me and said the doctor had decided to admit Ella right away. The doctor came out and apologized for the admission error. I told him to apologize to Sarah, not me, as she was the one who had been misled about her sick daughter's admission. He went over and expressed his regret to Sarah for the confusion. I approached the admissions desk, handed over my credit card, and instructed the clerk to make sure all of Ella's charges were covered. I also requested an itemized bill when she was discharged, including the remaining balance from her account. The woman at the desk seemed nervous. She was probably the one who had alerted the doctor about the outstanding balance. Sarah approached me again, tears in her eyes, and gave me a big hug. I told her everything was taken care of and that Ella would receive the best care. I assured her that if they gave her any problems, she was to contact me immediately. The doctor returned and informed us that Ella's breathing had stabilized and that they would keep her for a few days to run tests and adjust her medication to ensure she received proper care. I could tell the doctor was eager to make up for the earlier admission mistake, and that was fine with me. I just wanted Sarah treated with respect and her daughter to get the attention she needed. Sarah and I went to the cafeteria to grab some coffee and chat for a few minutes. She thanked me over and over again, saying she had never met a man like me and didn't think men like me even existed. Please, Sarah, no more tears. I'm here if you need me. I honestly didn't know why I was going out of my way to help a woman I barely knew. I just felt responsible for her, but I wasn't sure why. She said she needed to get back to Ella's room and wanted to be there with her. I told her to call me later in the day because there were a few things I wanted to discuss with her. She promised to repay every dollar I had loaned her, even if it took the rest of her life. I smiled and told her I liked the idea of seeing her for that long, and I might hold her to it. After that, I headed home. Later that day, she called to let me know that Ella was doing better. The doctor explained that Ella's medications hadn't been working properly, which caused the breathing episode, but now that they had run tests, they were confident they could find the right combination. Ella would likely be released in a couple of days. Sarah thanked me again and mentioned that she hadn't forgotten I wanted to see her. She planned to come by the next day as her friend Olivia would be staying with Ella. 2 days later, an old car, billowing blue smoke from its exhaust, pulled up in front of my office. I watched as Sarah jumped out, smiling when she saw me at the door. "How did you know I was coming?" she asked. I grinned and told her, "Your car's noise and smoke arrived 10 minutes before you did." She laughed and walked into my small office. As she entered, she noticed a beautiful woman sitting at the reception desk and seemed surprised, probably not expecting me to have a secretary. I introduced them. "Sarah, this is Emily, and Emily, this is Sarah, the woman I mentioned to you." They exchanged greetings, though they looked each other up and down in that way women sometimes do when sizing each other up. It made me chuckle. Emily was my younger sister, and she still acted like she was in charge of looking out for me. She always watched any woman who came into my life carefully. She often reminded me that she hadn't liked Sophia, but I married her anyway, and look where that had gotten me. I had told Emily about Sarah, and I could tell that's why she was scrutinizing her so hard. She didn't want her big brother to get hurt again. Emily had been working for me for years, though she preferred fewer hours these days. I was thinking of hiring Sarah and wanted Emily's opinion, so I planned to have her interview Sarah for the position. After the introductions, I asked Sarah to come into my office, telling Emily to hold any calls for a few minutes. Sarah followed me into my office and sat down in a chair while I took my place behind the desk. I asked about Ella, and she told me Ella was doing great. She thanked me again, saying that because of all I had done, it had probably saved her daughter's life, even though I hadn't met Ella yet. She looked at me and said, "I know you'll love Ella when you meet her. I can see the kindness in your eyes and know you've got a big heart after everything you've done for us." "Well, Sarah," I said, "there are a few things we need to discuss." She quickly interrupted, "I'll pay you back." I stopped her. "This isn't about money, Sarah. I need to ask you a few questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me if I'm going to keep helping you." "I've been truthful with you, Ben. I know about the assault." She immediately burst into tears. I stood up and walked around my desk, and as she stood, I held her close. "I didn't bring it up, Ben, because no one ever believed me. I figured you wouldn't either. That's why Tim left. He didn't want to be a father to another man's child. I'm sorry, Ben, but everything else I've told you is the truth. She sat back down, and I pulled up a chair to sit beside her. Sarah, you could get a DNA test, and if it comes back positive, he'd have to pay child support, I said. He admitted to sleeping with you, even if it was consensual. Then he assaulted me, she replied. I don't want his money, not if it means he could try to take my daughter or even be around her. Every time I see him on TV, my skin crawls. I don't want him anywhere near her. You understand that, don't you? Of course I do. I'm sorry, I was just thinking about your financial situation, I said, realizing I hadn't fully considered her concerns. Are you good? I asked. What do you mean? She replied, sounding confused. Sexually, I blurted. Oh my God, no. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I was thinking ahead of myself. I meant to ask if you're good with bookkeeping and basic office tasks. I think so. What are you getting at, Ben? I'm considering offering you a job, I explained. But it depends on my sister's opinion. She's great at reading people. If you're interested, she'll interview you. That beautiful woman out there is your sister, she asked, looking surprised. I'd love to interview for the job if it comes with insurance, she added with a smile. I wasn't sure if she was smiling about the job or the fact that Emily was my sister. I called Emily in and told her I needed to head out to work on a case involving a cheating husband. I asked her to have Sarah fill out an application and conduct the interview like we'd discussed earlier. I'd be back later and we could talk about it then. I told Sarah I'd contact her with our decision and she thanked me once again. I left telling them they could use my office, then headed out thinking to myself I really hope Emily likes her, I sure do. Maybe I was getting too attached, but I had promised to respect Emily's judgment. A few hours later, I called the office to let Emily know I wouldn't be able to make it back that night. I was still tailing the cheating husband. She asked if I wanted to talk about Sarah, but I told her, not right now, I need to stay focused. I'll call Sarah and let her know we'll have an answer for her tomorrow. Emily could sense my nerves from the way I spoke. Ben, I'll tell you all about it on Sunday. But while you've got Sarah on the phone, tell her she starts Monday from your big sister. She hung up before I could reply. I felt a surge of relief and excitement. It was great news. I was eager to hear what Emily thought about Sarah. She had an incredible knack for judging character. I couldn't stop smiling as I continued my work, thinking about the information I needed to gather on this cheating husband. Honestly, didn't anyone care about their spouses anymore? For once, I wished I could tell a client their partner wasn't cheating. That would be refreshing, coming back with good news instead of confirming another affair. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Usually where there's smoke, there's fire. A cliché, but true nonetheless. I gave Sarah a quick call, and as soon as she answered, she eagerly asked, well, did I get the job? I hesitated, as I had a habit of doing that to people. Ben? Are you there? She asked, her voice sounding sad. Yes, Sarah, I'm here. I finally responded softly. I didn't get to talk with Emily for long, but she told me to tell you that she prefers skirts and blouses or business attire, and that you should be here at 9 a.m. on Monday. Do you think your old car can make it? I could hear her crying, but this time it was tears of joy. Oh, Ben, I'm so happy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've done so much for me, and you barely know me. We'll see you Monday, even if I have to walk all the way, she added. Listening to her gratitude brought tears to my own eyes, but I needed to focus on my job, so I wished her well and told her I'd see her Monday. I continued to follow my client's cheating husband, who pulled into a house in the suburbs. It looked like another desperate housewives situation, another suburban fling. Gathering evidence in homes was trickier, but my equipment was advanced enough to capture the audio and I could get the rest with photos. He parked in the garage and I pointed my microphone at the house, picking up their voices. While I recorded, I pulled up my laptop and looked up who lived at the address. Bob and Kim Morris had lived there for 10 years, according to the data service I used. I called my contact for a background check, wanting to provide my client with as much information as possible. She promised to get back to me quickly, so I focused on the audio coming through. Grunts and groans echoed in my earpiece, accompanied by explicit talk. I always wondered why men cheated. I had met this guy's wife. She was just as attractive as the woman he was with now. She didn't seem like the kind of woman who would constantly reject her husband. But my job wasn't to solve their marriage issues, it was to gather evidence. My source called back, saying there was nothing unusual on file for either person. It seemed like another marriage falling apart. I took a few photos of the car entering and leaving the property so I wouldn't have to return later. I reviewed the files and found that they were high school classmates, probably reigniting an old romance. Damn, I hated cases involving kids. I finished gathering the evidence and handed the photos and recordings to my client. As it turned out, Kim had been her rival in high school. My client thought she had won the guy, but apparently aside from his money, he wasn't much of a prize. My work was done, now it was up to the couples to argue it out in court. On Sunday, I stopped by my sister Emily's house to talk about Sarah before seeing her on Monday. Emily greeted me with a big sisterly hug, and her 2 kids came running, shouting, "Uncle Ben! Uncle Ben!" Emily had been married for about 7 years to Ryan, a great guy who was an electronics whiz. Thanks to him, I always had the latest and best equipment. While Ryan grilled steaks and the kids played in the pool, Emily and I sat down to talk. "So, what do you think of Sarah?" I asked. "She's wonderful, smart, quick to learn, and yes, she's gorgeous," Emily replied with a grin. I went over some of the tasks she'd be responsible for, and she picked them up right away. She's good with computers, though she'll need some time to learn our specific programs, but I don't think that'll be an issue. She did ask if she could bring Ella to the office for the first few weeks, until she gets her set up in a preschool, Emily continued. I told her I'd run it by you, but I don't see a problem with it. "Oh, and Ben, there's something else you might not like this, but she's in love with you."
What I scoffed.
"Come on, Emily. I helped her out. She probably just appreciates what I've done for her and Ella, and I've offered her a way out of a tough situation. But love? No way. Besides, I'm 12 years older than her." "Ben, she's incredibly thankful for everything you've done for her. It's clear she feels indebted to you for all your help. But it's more than that, Ben. She loves you deep down in her heart. She'll do anything for you, and I can see it plainly," Emily said, her tone serious. "I really like Sarah, Ben. Please don't hurt her. She and her daughter have been through a lot." "God, Emily, the last thing I want is to hurt her," I reassured her. "I promise to be good to her. If you ever think I'm mistreating her in any way, let me know, and I'll do my best to fix it." "Just take it slow, Ben. Don't rush anything, and it'll all work out," Emily said with a smile. "Now let's go eat those steaks Ryan made." Emily never held back. I wondered if she knew how I really felt about Sarah. Time would tell, I guessed. I informed Emily that I'd be coming in late on Monday as I had a few loose ends to tie up. I asked her to get Sarah started in the morning. When I arrived around noon, I saw that Sarah had parked her old clunker in my spot, which made me laugh. As I walked in, Emily was holding the most adorable little girl I had ever seen. She looked just like her mother. Emily kissed her on the cheek and set her down. The little girl walked over to me, and I picked her up. "Hi, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Ella Jones," she answered. "Well, hello, Ella Jones. It's nice to meet you. You can call me Uncle Ben." "Uncle Ben, my mummy said you saved my life." "Thank you," she said, hugging me tightly. It was the sweetest thank you I had ever received, and it made my eyes water. I glanced over at Emily, and saw that her eyes were also teary. Just then, Sarah came out of one of the offices and saw me holding Ella. She smiled, but when she noticed Emily and me wiping our eyes, her expression changed. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concerned. No, everything's fine. Your little girl just made my day," I replied, smiling. I told Sarah to take her car down to the dealership and ask for Ray. She needed something more reliable if she was going to be working for us. She was about to mention money, but instead she asked if she should take Ella with her. I assured her that we would look after Ella. Later, Rai, my auto dealer, called and told me that Sarah had driven up in her old beat-up car and started browsing the used cars on the lot. When he told her that wasn't what she was supposed to be looking at, she thought the new cars were out of her price range. Rai took her inside and explained that I wanted her to choose a new car. He told her we leased cars for the business, and she could pick any reasonable option, with the business covering the cost. I had given Rai a price limit, but I trusted Sarah wouldn't choose anything too expensive. She smiled at the Audi, but Rai didn't say anything until she moved on to the compact cars and picked one. She wanted a 4-door so Ella's car seat would fit, and she preferred vinyl seats, knowing kids tend to spill things. Rai told her she could pick a bigger car if she wanted, but she insisted on the one she had chosen, asking if they had it in blue, Ella's favorite color. She also requested a portable DVD player for Ella to watch movies during trips. Rai confirmed they had the car in blue and would install the DVD player. While they prepared the car, Sarah cleaned out her old one, asking for a few garbage bags to toss her things in. Rai's team transferred the child's seat to the new car and switched the plates. Before she left, Rai asked why she had stared at the Audi but hadn't asked about it. She told him it was the same car I drove, which made her smile. "I love my little car," she said. It's perfect for me. Sarah loaded her 2 bags into the trunk of the new car and returned to the office, parking it in my spot with a proud grin. When she walked in, she gave me a big hug and then, realizing, said, "Oh, I'm sorry. You're my boss now." Emily and I both laughed. Sarah had a way of doing little things that always made us smile. I liked her a lot. Over the next few days, Sarah and Emily became fast friends, more like sisters. It was nice hearing them laughing together from my office. Ella would often come into my office and sit on my lap while I made phone calls or worked on my computer. She would quietly color or draw while I worked. I adored that little girl and realized that I felt the same way about her mother, even though I struggled to admit it. While we kept things professional in the office, Sarah and I would occasionally go out to dinner, always bringing Ella along. One morning, I decided it was time to pay a visit to Matthew Harris. I had to tread carefully with him, knowing he had assaulted Sarah. She wanted nothing to do with him, and I understood why. I had an appointment with him that morning. His secretary informed him of my arrival, and after a short wait, she let me into his office. "So, Mr. Sam Mitchell, private investigator, what can I do for you?" Harris asked. "I'm here on behalf of Grace Evans," I replied. "That case is closed," he said sharply. "I never assaulted her. We had consensual sex. If you have any further questions, you can contact my lawyer. Now please leave." "All right, Mr. Reynolds," I said. "I'll head over to the newspaper and let them know about your daughter, the one you don't acknowledge. I'm sure they'd love that story, especially with your awards ceremony coming up next week." "Child." "What child?" he asked, his face turning pale. "I'm done playing games with you. The girl you assaulted, had consensual sex with 4 years ago, had a baby. Your baby. I've got all the proof I need to make this public. I'm sure your wife, children, and grandchildren will be thrilled to learn they have a new family member." He was clearly shocked. He had no idea that Sarah had gotten pregnant. I noticed an inhaler on his desk, and he quickly used it. "Oh, by the way," I added, "your child has asthma. I guess that runs in the family. What do you want from me? How do I know you're not lying?" "Let's start with what I want for Sarah and your daughter," I said calmly. "First, I want you to sign a document giving up all parental rights. You will not interfere in their lives or have any contact with either of them. Sarah will have full custody. The next thing I want is a cashier's check made out to Grace Evans for $40,000. This will cover the medical bills already incurred and any future expenses, mainly due to the pregnancy and Ella's asthma," I demanded. "That's blackmail. I could have you arrested," he blurted out. "No, you fat pig," I shot back, feeling my anger rise. "It's an easy way out for you. If you'd prefer, you can cover all her medical expenses and pay child support for 18 years, and then your family and the public will know everything." That was my suggestion to Miss Evans, but she doesn't want you anywhere near her or her child. As proof, I'll give you a copy of her daughter's DNA results. You can show it to your attorney, who will agree with this settlement. Consider yourself lucky you're getting off easy." I continued, "I'll be back in 2 days to collect the letter and the check. If you're feeling brave, we can take this to court." I thanked him for his time and left, making my way back to the office. Emily met me and asked to talk privately. In my office, she looked at me and said, "When are you going to ask Sarah to marry you?" What I asked surprised. "You love Sarah. I see it every time you look at her," Emily replied. "I know you're taking it slow like I told you to, but you love her, Ben." "I haven't even really kissed her," I admitted. "I'm moving slowly, just like you said. I never could lie to Emily, and I knew she could see through me. I think I'm in love with her," I confessed. "I've never felt this strongly about anyone. Not even Sophia. But I'm 12 years older than Sarah. What will our marriage look like 5 or 10 years from now? Will she want someone younger then?" "You idiot." "That girl loves you," Emily said, exasperated. "She tells me how much she's in love with you nearly every day. And by the way, Ella loves you too. She told me that if she had a daddy, she'd want him to be like you." I didn't know what to say. I asked Emily once more if she was sure. She rolled her eyes and walked out of the room. A moment later, Sarah approached me. "Ben, would you like to go on a real date with me? My roommate Olivia is getting married this Saturday, and she asked me to invite you to the wedding. I'm always talking about you, and she'd love to meet you." "Wow, you're right. I've never met her, but I'd be honored to be your date," I replied. That was a great start. Later, when I was alone with Emily, I mentioned the wedding and asked if she could watch Ella on Saturday. She laughed and said, "We worked that out a week ago. I knew you'd say yes, so I told Sarah to wait to ask you. You're terrible with planning. But for the record, I'll be watching Ella for the whole weekend. You should take Sarah to your condo, she's never seen it. Just make sure she's back by Monday for work. Emily had always been looking out for me, even though she was younger. Ever since our parents died in a car accident when I was 22, she'd taken care of me in more ways than I could count. A few days later, it was time to check in with that lowlife, Mr. Reynolds. I wondered how he'd react. He always acted like the boss, arrogant and untouchable, but this time he had met his match. I walked up to his receptionist and asked to see him. "Are you Sam Mitchell?" she asked. I nodded. "Mr. Reynolds isn't available to see you, but he left this envelope for you," she said, handing it to me. I thanked her and left the building. The coward didn't even have the guts to face me. I got in my car and opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $40,000 and a signed letter giving up all parental rights to Ella. I was over the moon. There was also a note from him. "Mr. Carter, my business with you is finished. I expect this case to be closed. I trust you to keep your word." Well, unfortunately for him, I was a man of my word. I put the letter back in the envelope and returned to the office, calling Sarah and Emily in for a meeting. They sat down, and little Ella ran around to sit on my lap. I opened the envelope, took out the letter and check, and handed them to Sarah. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking puzzled. Emily explained, "It means Matthew Harris has given up all legal rights to Ella. He won't ever be able to interfere in your life again. He also gave you $40,000 to help raise her on the condition that you never contact him." "You mean this money is mine? And no one can ever take Ella from me?" Sarah asked, tears welling up in her eyes. Emily nodded, and Sarah stood up, walked over to me, and kissed me a real kiss, full of love. Then she wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. Emily smirked and whispered, "Told you so." Ella looked up from my lap and asked, "Mummy, why are you kissing Uncle Ben?" Sarah smiled and replied, "Because I love him, sweetheart, and I don't care if he knows it." I didn't know what to say, so I suggested we close up the office early and go celebrate. Emily called Ryan, and we all decided to meet at Olive Garden for dinner. At the restaurant, Sarah thanked me again for getting the letter and the money from Matthew Harris. She also reiterated what she had said at the office, that she truly loved me. Lately, I'd been at a loss for words around her, but I knew that when I did tell her I loved her, the moment would have to be perfect, just the right time and place. During dinner, Ella asked to sit between her mother and me, which took a little pressure off me. But then, out of nowhere, my sweet little Ella blurted out, "Uncle Ben, do you love my mummy? She told me she loves you." Out of the mouths of babes, everyone at the table heard, and I wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't exactly the time or place. I leaned down to her and whispered, "Yes, I love your mummy, and I love you too." Ella looked surprised but happy. She stood on her chair, threw her arms around me, and gave me a big hug. Then, looking at her mum, she proudly announced, "Mummy, Uncle Ben loves both of us." I laughed, replying, "Sweetheart, that was supposed to be a secret. You weren't supposed to tell anyone." "Oh, I'm sorry, Uncle Ben, but Mummy says I shouldn't keep secrets from her. She says it helps protect me better," Ella responded with a grin. I sat at the table, quietly ignoring the laughter and comments from the others. In 2 days, I would be going to a wedding with Sarah, and maybe the atmosphere would be more romantic. When I arrived at work on Friday, Emily walked into the office, handing me a check for $2,100. She said Sarah had sent it as repayment for all the medical bills I'd helped cover. Then Emily handed me $3,100 bills, explaining that Sarah insisted on returning the unearned money since she could now afford to. Emily laughed and added that Sarah said when I felt she had earned it, I could give it back to her. On Saturday afternoon, I picked Sarah up for our date. Olivia had already left for her wedding, which meant Sarah and Ella would now be living alone in the trailer. Emily was there picking up Ella when I arrived. She glanced around the trailer, then approached me before Ella came out. "Big brother, follow your heart and do the right thing tonight." I knew exactly what she meant, and it was already part of my plan. Never in my life had my little sister tried to set me up with someone. She never trusted other women, or maybe she just always understood my heart better than I did. Sarah appeared at the door, looking like an angel in blue. Words couldn't describe how I felt in that moment. I walked up to her, took her hand, and led her to my car. She kissed Ella and told her to be good for Aunt Emily, then hugged Emily and thanked her for everything. I opened the car door for Sarah and complimented her on how beautiful she looked. We drove to the wedding and took our seats inside the church. As the ceremony began, I held Sarah's hand. I watched the bride walk down the aisle, and to my surprise, she was an older woman, maybe around 55. It hadn't occurred to me that the bride might be older. As she passed, she smiled at Sarah, who had already started tearing up. I handed her my handkerchief, knowing she was happy for her friend, but likely wondering about her own future wedding. At the reception, Sarah introduced me to Olivia, who greeted me warmly. "It's so nice to finally meet you," Olivia said. "Thank you for everything you've done for Sarah. I've always wondered what a guardian angel looked like, and now I know she gave me a big hug." Throughout the night, I danced every slow song with Sarah, telling her how stunning she looked and how wonderful she smelled. "You better like it you bought it for me," she teased, reminding me of the cologne and lipstick I'd bought her. I kept holding her close, enjoying every moment. Olivia asked me for a dance, and as we moved across the floor, she mentioned how much Sarah cared for me. It seemed everyone knew. Several men asked Sarah to dance, but she turned them all down, except for the groom, who danced with her briefly before switching partners with Olivia, bringing Sarah back into my arms. I asked Sarah why she didn't want to dance with anyone else. "This is our first real date," she said, "and I'd rather only dance with you." I decided it was time to speak my heart. Sarah and I stepped out onto the patio, away from the crowd. Taking a deep breath, I began. "Sarah, I love you with all my heart and soul. I think you know that, and it seems like everyone else does too. I want you to marry me, but I've been worried that the age difference between us might be an issue." She placed a finger on my lips to stop me and softly said, "Ben, our ages don't matter to me. I don't care if you're 22 or 62. You're the most kind, caring, and amazing person I've ever known. I fell in love with you from the first night we spent together. I was afraid I wasn't good enough for you. But the more I got to know you, the deeper I fell in love. If your offer still stands, I'd love to be your wife." I kissed her, gently and lovingly. "Ben, there's something I need to tell you. I may not be a good lover. I've had sex, of course, because I have a daughter, but I've never made love. I'm scared I won't be able to please you." I gazed into her tear-filled eyes and said, "I want a wife who loves me, and we'll figure out the rest together. Will you come home with me tonight, and we'll see how it goes?" There was no doubt in my mind about our chemistry. I had wanted her since the night I picked her up from the motel, and I hadn't been with anyone since. "I don't usually sleep with someone on a first date," she teased, "but I'll make an exception for you." "Can we leave now and get a head start?" I joked. We said our goodbyes to Olivia and her husband. I saw Sarah whisper something to Olivia, and I knew she had told her I'd proposed. They hugged, and then we left. When we arrived at my condo, Sarah was stunned. She couldn't believe how nice it was with the pool, sauna, and hot tub. "Do you want to start in the hot tub?" I asked, smiling. She shook her head. We went inside, and she admired the place, though she said it could use a woman's touch. She was right, there's something about a woman's decorating that always makes a home feel more complete. I showed her around, eventually leading her to the master bedroom. When she saw the king-size bed, she smiled and said, "I'd like to start here," pointing at the bed. We were both a little nervous, which was surprising for me. I'd done this dozens of times, and I was 37 years old. But something about this was different. I walked over to the CD player and put on a romantic album, letting the soft music fill the room. I turned off the lights, leaving only a corner lamp on for a warm glow. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "More than anything," she replied. "Please be gentle with me." I reached for the zipper of her dress and slowly pulled it down, letting the dress slide off her shoulders and fall to the floor. She stepped out of it, and I carefully folded it over a chair. I pulled her into my arms and kissed her, savoring the scent of her perfume. The kisses were soft, just barely touching her lips with mine. I quickly slipped off my jacket while she worked on my tie. When I reached to unbutton my shirt, she playfully slapped my hand away, saying she wanted to do it herself. After she unbuttoned my shirt, she moved on to my belt and pants. In no time, we were both down to our underwear. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, and I gently pushed her back until she was lying on her back, her legs still hanging over the edge. As the soft romantic music filled the room, I could hear Sarah's sighs and moans, driving me half crazy. We didn't need words, our connection was clear. Finally, I gave in completely, and she let out a loud gasp, crying out, "God, oh God, I've never felt anything like this," before another wave of pleasure overtook her. She moved to the center of the bed, and I joined her. "Ben, that was the most incredible feeling ever," she murmured. I started kissing her, and she responded with even more passion. Ben, let me return the favor. You've given me so much, and I want to do the same for you. I love you, Ben, I love you so much, she said, her voice full of affection. As her excitement began to settle, she giggled and said, I think I'm going to make a mess when I get up. After resting for about half an hour, I asked her if she'd packed a swimsuit, and she pulled it out from her overnight bag. I suggested we cool off in the pool before getting back to more love-making. Ben, I love that you say love instead of sex, because that's exactly what it is with you. I've had sex before, but I've never made love until tonight. There's a lot more love where that came from, I teased. Just give me an hour or so to recharge and let's head to the pool. She slipped into a cute two-piece swimsuit, and I quickly put on my own swim trunks before we headed to the pool. After cooling off, she suggested we try the hot tub. Watching her in the hot tub was enough to stir my desires again. I couldn't keep my hands and lips off her. She reached down and felt my arousal. I think it's time we go back inside before we get into trouble out here, she teased with a smile. With my desire burning, we headed back inside, ready for round 2. Sarah was eager and waiting for me. I began with straightforward lovemaking, keeping myself propped up to avoid putting my full weight on her. The experience was incredibly erotic, especially with Unchained Melody playing softly in the background. The lyrics echoed perfectly, "Oh my love, my darling, I hunger for your touch." I couldn't believe how much stronger my feelings were at that moment. At 37, I had never felt this way before. We were both exhausted afterward, so I let the music continue while I turned off the lights, holding her close as we drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up first and brewed some coffee. When I returned to the bedroom, Sarah was awake and asked, "Do you still love me? Is the love strong enough for me to be your wife?" I smiled and told her I had something for her. "You're not giving me the $250 back, are you?" she joked, grinning. I reached into the nightstand and pulled out an engagement ring. "No, not the $250, although you've more than earned it. I have this instead. Will you marry me, Grace Evans, and make me the happiest man alive?" I slid the ring onto her finger as she sat there, still completely bare, tears filling her eyes. She grabbed me and hugged me tightly, whispering, "Yes, yes, 100 times yes, I will be your wife. You've made me the happiest woman on earth." The rest of the weekend was just as magical, repeating the love and passion we'd shared before. By Monday, we were both glowing when we walked into work. Emily noticed right away. Well, little brother, I've never seen you glow like this before. Must have been one hell of a wedding you went to," she teased as I headed to my office. Inside, Ella was sitting at my desk, drawing. "I'm the boss today," giving all the orders, she announced with a giggle. Sarah came in and laughed. Watching her daughter give out orders when Ella saw her mother, she ran over excitedly. Their bond was beautiful, something every mother-daughter relationship should be. Sarah knelt down and showed Ella the engagement ring I had given her. "Mummy, what does that mean?" Ella asked curiously. "Well, sweetheart, it means that Mummy and Uncle Ben are going to get married," Sarah explained gently. Ella's eyes lit up, and she jumped up and down in excitement. "Yay! Uncle Ben's going to be my daddy," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my neck. I felt a lump in my throat as I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed with love for this little girl. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, smiled at us both. "Yes, honey, Uncle Ben is going to be your daddy," she whispered. Ella stepped back and asked, "Does this mean we're all going to live together?" I smiled and nodded. She squealed with delight and ran out of the office, probably to tell Emily the good news. Sarah moved closer, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You've made me and Ella so happy, Ben. I can't wait to start our life together," she said softly. I kissed her on the forehead and replied, "Neither can I. I love you, Sarah, and I promise to take care of you and Ella for the rest of my life." The rest of the day flew by in a whirlwind of congratulations from Emily and Ryan, who stopped by the office. We began planning the wedding, and I insisted on making it a grand celebration, though Sarah preferred something small and intimate. I eventually convinced her that we should celebrate our love in a big way, with all our friends and family. Over the following weeks, we made all the necessary arrangements, with Emily taking charge of most of the planning. She was thrilled to be involved and embraced the role of wedding planner wholeheartedly. We decided to hold the wedding at a gorgeous vineyard just outside the city. The ceremony would take place outdoors, surrounded by nature and the people we loved. On the wedding day, everything went off without a hitch. The weather was perfect, with bright sunshine and the vineyard in full bloom, creating a beautiful backdrop for our special day. Sarah looked breathtaking in her wedding dress, and I couldn't take my eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. Ella was our flower girl, and she took her role seriously, scattering petals with a big smile. When Sarah reached me at the altar, I could see the joy and love in her eyes, and I knew I was the luckiest man in the world. The ceremony was beautiful, and as we exchanged vows, I felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. Sarah and Ella were my family now, and I knew I'd do anything to protect and cherish them. After the ceremony, we celebrated at the vineyard with a reception filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Sarah and I had our first dance as husband and wife, and in that moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Ella joined us on the dance floor, and that moment dancing as a family was something I would treasure forever. As the night progressed, I looked around at all the people who had come to share in our joy. Emily, Ryan, their children, and all our friends and family were there, and it felt like the ideal way to begin our new life together. When the reception came to a close, Sarah and I brought Ella back to what was now our home, the condo that Sarah had once admired. We had already started moving in some of her and Ella's belongings, and it was beginning to feel like a true home. That evening, as we tucked Ella into bed, she asked if we could all sleep together just for the night. Sarah and I exchanged smiles, and we agreed. The three of us snuggled up in the large bed, holding each other close. As I drifted off with my new wife and daughter beside me, I realized I had finally found what I had been seeking my entire life: a family, a home, and a love that would endure forever. The next morning, we awoke to the sound of Ella giggling. She was already up, playing with the blankets and building a fort over our heads. Sarah and I laughed and joined in, beginning our first day as a married couple filled with happiness and love. From that moment on, life became everything I had ever dreamed of. Sarah and I worked together at the office, with Emily still a part of our lives as both a co-worker and my sister. Ella started school, and every day she would come home with stories about her new friends and all the things she was learning. We quickly settled into a routine, but it was never dull. Each day was filled with love, laughter, and the little moments that make life so meaningful. We went on family vacations, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and watched Ella grow into a bright, compassionate, and loving young girl. As the years passed, I often looked back on everything that had unfolded, knowing with certainty that I had made the right choice. My life with Sarah and Ella exceeded anything I could have imagined. I was content, fulfilled, and deeply in love with my wife and daughter. In the end, it wasn't about the cases I had worked on, the money I had earned, or the possessions I had accumulated. It was about the people I cherished and the family we had built together, and that was more than enough for me. And that's how this investigator found not just another case, but a family. What would you do if someone like Sarah came to you for help? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.